Zoo Primer. This one specifically being about small zoo or aggro zoo. And that's what we're going to go over today. We're going to go over how the deck runs, how it's different from its other zoo-ish kind of archetypes, and the pros and cons of playing it, what it feels like, and actually having a match played with it. So, what is it? Well, it values its creatures as sort of repeatable burn, in that respect that it wants to put out its creatures, have a wild Noctowl, which is the green lightning bolt, and keep hitting with it turn after turn. If, for example, a wild Noctowl hits 3 times for 1 mana, it's basically a 1 mana 9 damage burn spell. It wants to force the opponent on its heels, so it wants to immediately turn 1, say, here's my threats, either you deal with it or you die. It's very, very consistent in the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to run a 1/3 burn, 1/3 creatures, 1/3 land base, but it's something similar to that, where it's you've just got a lot of redundancy in your creatures, like you don't necessarily die to a Thoughtseize, or you don't die to a Memoricide when they just take your wild Noctowls out of your deck, because you still have you know, like 20 different creatures that you can still beat down with. It says a lot of sustainable aggression. A lot of other decks don't have sustainable aggression. That's something that actually sets Zoo apart of a bunch of aggro decks, is that unlike Affinity, which has this like huge push, or another one, Goblins, which has this like gigantic push forward, it does not have a it doesn't have a way that like sort of just teeters out and dies. It does eventually run out of gas. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but it doesn't like necessarily get hated out super easily, or like they stall the game till turn 3, Zoo has no chance of winning. It can still win in the mid game or even late game. It's also considered to have the best creatures and the best burn. It's not really picky about what it's doing. Like, Affinity is a good choice to pair it up against again, where Affinity needs artifact creatures or robots in order to function. All Zoo really wants is, if it's in the Naya colors, and it can burn someone to death, or it's the best removal, or it's got the best sort of creatures, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the most efficiency in terms of aggression creatures. Why should you play Zoo? Well, let's go over the pros. If you like an aggressive attack approach, basically that everything you do is going to be a threat, and you're saying deal with it or you die, and you don't like sort of like how mid-range pitter-patters around for a little bit until it gets to mid-range and then starts to take over the game, or you don't even like the idea of like controlling the board state and then dropping something, but you just want to be constantly on the push forward, trying to beat down face as fast as possible, well then Zoo is going to be one of those decks that you want to look at. Also, if you like to play with the best creatures and the best burn that Magic has to offer, then Zoo's definitely up in your alley. A lot of other decks run a lot of either good creatures or good burn, but they sort of subpar each other. Zoo is never really looking to do that. Zoo is trying to optimize its game plan and streamline its game plan continuously, whether that's removal, burn, or creatures. Just it wants the best of the best. If you want a deck that's fast and not easily to be hated out completely, then Zoo's up your alley. Affinity and sort of Goblin decks, Red Deck Wins kinds of decks can get hated out pretty easily just by simply having like Artifact Hate will kill Affinity. You know, Ancient Grudge is really, really great against Affinity, and Creep and Corrosion destroys them. Or, likewise, if you play against Red Deck Wins and someone plays something random like a, probably a Timely Reinforcement, or even something as simple as a Rest for the Weary, it could just basically make you lose, because your deck is only built to get to 20 points and that's about it. Zoo is not easy to hate out. Yes, you can wipe their board with a timely Anger of the Gods, but there's still ways that you can play around Anger of the Gods, and also it doesn't necessarily fold to that because you're still running like about something around 12 different creatures that don't die to Anger of the Gods regardless. Maybe even up to 16, depends. And Anger of the Gods, like, our creatures, if you kill 2 or 3 of our creatures, we still have 4 more that can replace it. And if you love deck consistency, then this is really up your alley. It's rarely playing 1-ofs, 2-ofs. It's basically just playing 4-ofs of the best things it can get its hands on and hoping to win the game with that. But why should you not play Zoo? If you don't like to play Zoo, and if you don't like to play Zoo, keep watching because it's going to talk about how Zoo runs and it might give you a better chance to beat it. But if you don't like to, if you don't like to play single attack types of decks, aka decks that just are trying to get your life points down to 0, and that's it through just attacking with creatures, turning dudes sideways, this is not your deck. Even things like Affinity have a backup plan of things like Infect, and it's just very linear in that approach. It doesn't make that Zoo's stupid or like a dumb deck to play, it's just very linear in its approach of how it wins the game. If you want stack interaction, Zoo is not going to be where you want to go. Zoo's form of stack interaction is things like Lightning Bolt. It's very good at removing creatures like, for example, the Merfolk deck. It wants to interact and combo off with lots of Lord effects. Well, Zoo's very good at burning out those Lords and making it like bad blocks or bad beats in general and just keeping it down. Tempo decks, it's really great at doing. And that's the sort of stack interaction it deals with. It does not deal with stack interaction on those respects of like stopping combo decks, playing counter spells. Even Counter Cat is not that great at it. So if you're looking for like stack interaction to beat out combo decks, beat out mid-range decks, beat out control decks, you're not going to find that here. We have a very aggressive, proactive attack against those types of decks. For example, Blood Moon is a good card to use in Zoo, as well as things like Aethersworn Canonist. But none of those things deal with the stack interaction. They're basically attacks saying if this isn't going to happen if we can help it. Or a speed bump to say we're going to slow you down until we win. If you want to win turn 3 or earlier, this is actually not the deck for you. Gruul Zoo can do a turn 3 win or earlier sometimes, but if you're going to want to do things that like just explode and win the game turn 3 and earlier, you're looking at things like Affinity on the nut draw, but things like Infect sometimes, as well as like the Nimvagus combo. Those are all decks that can attack and win on turn 3 or earlier. Zoo doesn't play like that. Zoo wants to be a bit more consistent. It sacrifices speed for consistency. It's still very fast. It still has a very, like, with no interaction, a turn 4 win. Reliably. But that's the thing, it's reliable. Unlike Affinity, where you draw a hand and you might get random something or other, Zoo isn't going to do that. Zoo's going to want to look at saying, I will reliably have a turn 4 or 5 win regardless. But if you want that explosiveness, you shouldn't look in Zoo. If you like big things on the other end of the spectrum, you also shouldn't look for Zoo. We're talking big things like that Jund is able to do, like Hellkites or giant scavenging oozes, Tarmogoyfs that are generally bigger than 3/4. We're also looking at things like Obliviator, or let's look at in-color options. Even Elspeth is a little bit pricey for this kind of deck. If you want big things, this is not necessarily a deck. Things like Inferno Titans, for example, will never be cast in Zoo. Also, if you hate animals and you just have something against animals because maybe you just only like vegetables, then you should play Zoo. Zoo should play and feel like this. This is an illustrated version of what I think the style of Zoo is. You want to feel aggressive, even trolly at times, and you want to back it up with the best sort of burn that you can do. You're burning out the way of creatures that are in front of you, and you're letting your animals get to work, and then your burn can double as reach if your creatures are not able to hit the face anymore. Alright, so how do you build it? Well, there's a creature core that you want to go for, and that's going to be things like Experiment 1, Wild Noctowl, Curdape, and Tarmogoyf. That's going to be the main core you're going to want to look at. There are other options that you can do. You can add things in there, and we'll get to that in a second. But I honestly do think that Experiment 1 is sort of like a bad Wild Noctowl, but is still better than Curdape. There are different situations where it arises that Curdape's big butt, for all intents and purposes, Curdape should be looked at as a 2/3. But there are a ton of times where Experiment 1 is simply just as good as Curdape, if not better. Things like Blood Moon, Experiment 1 will retain how big it is. If it ends up getting up to a 3/3, it can survive board wipes, aka Anger of the Gods. Just like I said, that this deck it can reliably still do. And not only that, it can also evolve up to a 4/4, 5/5, depending on your Tarmogoyf size, and depending on if you have Knight of the Rock Warrior or even Woolly Thoktar in your deck. So E1 is at worst generally in this deck, especially with this creature core, a turn 2, 2/2. Now you have to look at that, and that is worse than Kirdape, but it hits for just as much damage as Kirdape for 1 mana. So the trade-off isn't necessarily that bad, since you're going to be the aggressive role anyways and not the defensive role generally. With Wild Noctowl backing it up, though, you generally have a turn 1, 3/3 followed by, even if you put a Kirdape and a Wild Noctowl out, you're looking at having 2 3/3s that you wouldn't normally have. And I will gladly say that having 8 1-mana 3/3s is much better than having 4 1-mana 3/3s. Tarmogoyf in this deck is a little bit interesting. Tarmogoyf is only generally going to be a 3/4 in this deck. You're really only going to be running instances. We don't have things like Chain Lightning, which Legacy does, which would be the main reasoning Tarmogoyf would get anywhere higher. Also, we're not Jund, so we're not doing things like Thought Seizing and making Tarmogoyf bigger strictly off of the fact that we're using a sorcery and probably a fetch land that we crack to get that sorcery into the graveyard. To get something else, which generally means Tarmogoyf's going to be at 3/4 right away, and it blocks creature and then becomes a 4/5. That's not going to happen in this deck. It does sometimes. It just depends on what your opponents are playing, really, more than it depends on what you're playing. Wild Noctowl is, again, the reason why this deck is good again. It was banned for a while. Fun fact, Kirdape and Wild Noctowl. Kirdape wasn't banned in Modern, but it was banned in Legacy for a little while. I'm sorry, extended for a little while, and Wild Noctowl was banned to make aggro decks better in Modern, which didn't happen, so they re-put Wild Noctowl out there. Experiment 1 was also supposed to replace Wild Noctowl. They said, when banning Wild Noctowl, that they were going to print something very soon that was very similar to Wild Noctowl, and it's very obviously Experiment 1. Moving on, here's some other creature options that you have. You have Vexing Devil. Vexing Devil is alright. I wouldn't suggest it unless you're a super, super, super aggressive zoo, and especially if you're going like the 20-20-20, because it is usually burn more than its creatures, especially in this deck. In the red deck wins deck, it's a bit more of a catch-22, damned if you do, damned if you don't. In zoo, it will probably never be a creature, because they don't like giving us creatures, and that's what we're trying to attack with. Steplinks is another choice that you can have, and it was very good. In fact, it sort of was what E1 replaced, because you get Landfall, and it can become a 4/5 on turn 2 and attack for 4 damage reliably for about 2 to 3 turns. And it becomes even crazier if you have Knight of the Rough Quarry in your deck. But it's sort of fallen by the wayside because we don't use Landfall nearly as much as things like Boros decks do. And we don't abuse it nearly as much either. Scavenging Ooze is a good card, and it's definitely something you want to consider for your main deck or your sideboard, but it would never be a 4-of like it would be in the mid-range deck. It's Grave Hate, which is awesome. It gets bigger, which is awesome. It's Life Gain, which is great, especially against Red Deck Wins, which isn't one of our greatest matchups in the world. But it is very mana costly, and generally this deck wants to play about 20, 21 lands, maybe. So you're never really going to pump it very often unless it's late game, and if it's already late game, you're becoming more and more inclined to lose in the game. Voice of Resurgence is sort of still in the same boat. It can be a flex card that you add in. It has it replaces itself, which is the big thing. So it's basically protection against board wipes. So if it dies, then you get a 1/1. But generally in this deck, that 1/1 is going to become very big very quickly, especially if it just naturally dies and you've already got out like an Experiment 1 and a Wild Noctowl. You're looking at a pretty big 3/3, and not only that, it does evolve E1. It's worth noting that it will evolve E1 when entering the battlefield, and then if it dies and you've got 2 creatures already in the battlefield, it will enter as a 3/3, evolving E1 again, possibly evolving E1 higher if it's already a 3/3 and you've got more stuff out there. Knight of the Rough Quarry is my personal choice for the 3 converted mana cost for this deck, although you could very easily do Luxant and Smiter. In order to run Knight of the Rough Quarry efficiently in this deck, you are going to need to run about 10 fetch lands in order to get her reliably into a turn 3/4/4. She does get way bigger, and she can fetch sort of cool flex lands. And in this deck, you're probably only going to have about 2 flex lands. So, depending on what your flex lands are, she could be very cool. And we'll get to that in a little bit when I go over lands. Loon Lion is, again, my choice for your extra 1 converted mana cost beater. You can also use Goblin Guide and Grim Lavamancer. Those are all close seconds. But I like Loon Lion, especially when running E1, because it reliably evolves E1 to 3/3. And that's my main reasoning. Goblin Guide will get you some extra pressure, and he's got haste. He's a great card in general, but you got to remember the deck isn't like red deck wins, so occasionally that 2/2 tough or the 2/2 toughness does not pan out the best, because you want to be able to not only hit hard in the early game but also sustain into the later game. Goblin Guide should be noted that he will reveal spells more often than he reveals lands, and so he's not necessarily helping your opponents out. And not only that, but he is very, very good at finding out if your opponent has counterspells or removal and playing around it. Grim Lavamancer is sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit, since the deck runs a little bit less burn than its legacy version does. Do bear in mind, its legacy version runs about 12 fetch lands generally, 11 at least, all on color, so they're all good fetch lands to run, and runs 4 Lightning Bolts, 4 Lightning Helixes, 4 Path to Exiles, and 4 Chain Lightnings. So that gives a lot of stuff for Grim Lavamancer to dig for and deal some damage. In our version, we run probably closer to 26 or 28 creatures, so there's a lot less things for him to nom on, so to say. Not to mention, we're also more reliant on E1 than our legacy component is. So the whole not evolving E1 is a big deal. Thalia is a good card because it does evolve E1. It's a road bump. It's not nearly as good in this deck as it is in Death and Taxes or Hate Bears, but it still fills the same function, which is a Hate Bear to be a speed bump for the opponents. It's great against things like Storm, and in fact, it's one of the few Storm cards that I would say is main deckable, because at worst it hurts tempo, it hurts combo a lot, and it hurts control. So you're getting a lot of archetypes with it main decked. Qasali Pride Mage, again, is also a good flex spot. It's a Hate Bear. It can make E1 a 3/3 on turn 2 by playing it and then having the Exalted trigger. It can make E1 4/4 on turn 3. Maybe. And it just deals with a lot of artifacts and enchantments, which happen to be a lot of things in the modern meta. So it's gone up from being a sideboard card to being a main deckable card recently. The Lexodon Smiter is your other alternative to Knight of the Rookery, whether or not you have money. Knight, I think, is about $5 to $6, whereas Lexodon Smiter is about $1 and is probably going to even drop more after rotation. But it does have its uses. It's better against control decks to an extent. It's better against control decks that actually are using, how do I say, a counter magic or discard. It's better against Jund because it's a threat that can't be discarded, so they can't just take it out of your hand. It's great if they're using Liliana in the blind and you just drop it and beat Liliana. It's basically the counter to Liliana. But other than that, Knight of the Rookery is generally better because it will be bigger as long as you're running at least 10 fetches. It can also have better utility. It can mana ramp, so it's just got a bunch of options that it can do that once Lexodon Smiter enters the battlefield, it just becomes a very dumb 4/4 beater. Granted, it's still a good dumb 4/4 beater, and I'd say if you don't have 10 fetch lands, or if you don't have the cool flex lands that you can put in, then Lexodon Smiter is going to be better because it's not graveyard dependent, which is a big thing, so it can't be hated out by Scavenging Ooze. And it's also not, it's also going to reliably evolve E1 into a 3/3/4/4 no matter what. Moving along, here's another piece of your core that you're going to want to have. Aside from having the creature core, you're going to need the burn/removal core, which is going to be Lightning Bolt, ghor-clan Rampager, Lightning Helix, and Path to Exile. Notice ghor-clan Rampager is on here, even though it's a creature. Don't let its creature status fool you. It is a removal spell. It is very much a removal spell. I wouldn't say it's a burn spell, but it is definitely a removal spell. before getting onto that, let's go to Lightning Helix, Lightning Bolt. Easy enough to talk about. They are 1 mana, 2 mana for 3 to 6 point difference in life totals. Lightning Bolt hits for 3 for 1 mana. Lightning Helix hits for 3 for 1 mana and gains you 3 life for 1 mana. So for 2 mana, you're getting a 6-point life difference. It can be used towards creatures, which is its primary function. In fact, you side it out against a lot of non-creature decks because it's just a little bit of burn, and we're not red deck wins, so we've got reliable, repeatable burn in the fact of our creatures. We're not rushing to try to get them dead with our burn. But it's still the best burn that Modern has to offer. If we had Chain Lightning, it would be on this list. It is not there. You've got other kind of options you can have, which I'm going to get to in a second, that you can main deck. But this is what you're probably going to want to look at as a 4-4-4-4 in your main deck. Yeah, redundancy, you're going to want 4 of all of them. Path to Exile, some used to be a 3 of, but now is very strongly a 4 of, especially with the rise of Pod. You do not want Kitchen Finks around, which, speaking of which, is why ghor-clan Rampager's on there as well. ghor-clan Rampager is invaluable and is one of the toughest decisions you can make in the deck. It plays mind games with your opponent, where you pause at the attack phase and let them have a chance to burn out your creature, basically suggesting that you have ghor-clan Rampagers in hand, and it can psych them out. It is non-counterable. It's non-counterable, like it can't be mana leaked, but it can be countered in the fact that they can Lightning Bolt your target. So you always want to do it when they're tapped out. If you're fearing a Lightning Bolt, if you know that they don't have any form 2 for 1, you know Path to Exile, no Lightning Bolt, no Vapor Snag, whatever, and you're very confident in that, then you can Blood Rush without any cares in the world, and you know you're going to get in there for an extra 4 damage. But I would actually say that is removal about 40% of the time. No, I would say 60% of the time it's removal, and you actually cast it around 40% of the time because you're playing around removal. You never want to be 2 for 1, but you want to suggest that the opponent be greedy. There's always a test of greed. You can attack with your Wild Noctowl, and they go, alright, blockers, and you go, that's fine, it's attacking. Then they go, in response, Lightning Bolt. Then you go, in response, ghor-clan Rampager. You never want to waste your ghor-clan Rampager. You always want to make sure that it's in your hand ready to go. It's definitely powerful if you manage to get it off. It is utterly backbreaking if you fail. Like, if you fail, it hurts you like a ton. But at worst, if you get like Wrath to Exiled on, or Wrath of God on your turn 3, and you've got your 4 mana now, you can ghor-clan Rampager, and it's still a 4/4, which is awesome because if you look at the 2 spells that it's next to, it will survive a Lightning Bolt, and that's the big thing. That's the biggest removal in Modern, is Lightning Helix, Lightning Bolt, well, and Path to Exile. But it survives those things. It becomes a very good late-game beater if it has to be. At worst, you can go ahead and use it and Rampager over chump blockers, so little like spirits, 1/1 spirits, or mana dorks. It can go over walls, like Wall of Roots or Spellskite, and it can't be redirected to Spellskite, that's important. And it can also kill off things like Tarmogoyf. They block a Tarmogoyf going like to the Kurdape, like, oh, my 4/5 Tarmogoyf is going to destroy this 2/3 Tarmogoyf, or even Kurdape. Or even if they're like, it's bigger, it's like ridiculous sized, it's like 6/7. You Rampager with your dude, you're still going to kill it. Well, not 6/7, but a 5/6, you'll kill it. That's generally what Tarmogoyf is in Modern, at tops. So Rampager can be creature, mostly removal. How else can you build it? What other spells do you have at your disposal? Well, here's a big list of things that you can main deck. Some of them I don't suggest, but they're probably your best options for main deckable spells other than the ones that I gave you. Starting off with the pack, one that I don't suggest, but if you need it to be sort of extra Tarmogoyf protection, you got Flame Slash. In other decks like the Gruul deck, you want to use like some combination of Flame Slash and Dismember to make up for your lack of Path to Exile. Flame Slash is pretty good here, and the reason why I kept it there, even though we've got a Path to Exile, is it can do 4 damage to target creature, which is relevant, but it's a sorcery speed, and that feeds Goyf. You also got Rancor, and that is something that you can main deck. I would suggest main decking it if you were a bit more aggressive. You're doing a lot more 1-drops, and you want to get that trample in. Or you've got more haste creatures in your deck, like Goblin Guide or Flint Hoof Boar. Notice I didn't talk about Flint Hoof Boar because it's lower on my totem pole. Now that Wild Noctail's unbanned, it's like a bad... It's like Flint Hoof Boar is like a bad Wild Noctail. Anyways, it gives you +2 power. If it goes to the graveyard after your creature gets killed, as long as it's not in response, it jumps back into your hand, so it's always there to be a pump. And it gives trample, and that's huge when you're trying to get the late damage. Pillar of Flames is also super main deckable. And it does 2 damage to target creature or player, which is important. Yes, it's a shock, but it's also, again, a sorcery speed to defeat your Goyf. And the big thing is Exile, so it kills Voice of Resurgence, and more importantly, Kitchen Finks, which is the bane of this deck. And gets that out of the way. For good. It can also be used in conjunction with something else. So if you're going to Path to Exile, not Path to Exile, but if you're going to Lightning Bolt something that needs to die, and you also Pillar of Flames it, it will exile it. It doesn't have to be just killed by Pillar of Flames. You can Pillar of Flames first and then Lightning Bolt, and still make it exiled. Mutagenic Growth has climbed its way into my heart recently, even though I used to never use it. Mostly because of the rise of things like Anger of the Gods, which is very, very good against pods, so we're getting some splash damage since it's good against us, too. It's one of the few red board wipe spells that actually is good against us. Pyroclasm and Volcanic Fallout are awful against us. So, Mutagenic Growth can save one of your creatures. I've had funny situations where I've had a 2/3 Tarmogoyf, a 3/3 Wild Noctail, and a 3/3 E1, and I have casted the in response to the Anger of the Gods, casted Mutagenic Growth on my Wild Noctail, making my Wild Noctail a 5/5, and making my Tarmogoyf a 4/5 at the resolve of the Anger of the Gods, and then just regened my E1. So they used Anger of the Gods hoping to wipe my board, and instead they made my Tarmogoyf bigger, and my Wild Noctail stayed the same, and my E1 was only a 1/1, but that's still 1 more damage that I could use to win the game. So Mutagenic Growth is mostly used as a protection spell. It's very rarely used as a pump spell to end the game. You can do it, but it's mostly used if they've got a big-ass blocker and you need to kill that blocker, or you need to save your dude for free from a Lightning Bolt. And while we're on the topic of saving your dudes, Boros Charm becomes a great one, too. If the meta is, in your meta, it's more Lightning Bolts than it is a board wipes, then you're going to lean towards Mutagenic Growth and Vines of Vastwood. If it is more board wipes spells or 2-for-1 spells, then that's when Boros Charm becomes better. Boros Charm becomes has a ton of uses. Its biggest uses are the 4 damage, which reliably is 4 damage regardless, so even if they don't board wipe, you still have a 4 damage spell for 2 mana, which is a ton. Or you can make your permanency control indestructible. Now that has weird uses, like keeping your lands alive occasionally, keeping things like Rancor alive, which very rarely happens, keeping things like your Planeswalkers alive. It's weird that it's got that splash effect, but it's mostly used to keep your creatures alive. So you got the indestructibility and the 4 damage, which are awesome in the deck. But you also have this thing for Double Strike as well. Double Strike is not nearly as good in the small zoo as it is bigger zoo, but it can be a reliable combat trick if you are going to attack like something like a Curdape into a Curdape in a mirror and you have Boros Charm main decked. I would side it out. But if you had it in your main deck and it's game 1, you can do a Double Strike to use it as sort of convoluted removal spell. But the big use for it, and it can just blow out games if you actually have it in your hand, is you attack with a Curdape. They go, that's fine, no blocks because they're tapped out, and you go, whatever. I'm going to ghor-clan Rampager. My Curdape is now a 6/7. I'm going to use Double Strike on it. It's going to deal you a ridiculous amount of damage, 12 damage. I've had it on things like a 5/5 Knight of the Reliquary with the ghor-clan Rampager, making it a 9/9, and then double striking it for 18 damage, and they've only taken damage from their shock land and managed to keep me off of any other damage, and they're just dead in the water. So you can have an explosion like that occasionally. It very rarely happens, but it's worth noting that you've got it. While we're on the topic of saving things, again, Vines of Vastwood is probably the premier card to use against Bolt if you have the mana available. If you do not, Mutagenetic Growth is better. But if you have the mana available, and it does mean that you need to be a little bit stronger into green than you are into red or white, but you can reliably look at if you're on the play and you drop a wild Noctowl, and a control deck puts out their fetch land and says, I'm going to bolt it next turn. Cool. I'm going to do it on their turn because that's how control players are. They want to do everything on our turn. You attack with your wild Noctowl. They crack and fetch a Steam Vent. Go down to 17. Go to bolt the wild Noctowl. In response, you Vines of Vastwood it with the kicker. Their bolt gets thrown in the graveyard. They get hit for 7 damage. Suddenly, they're down to, let's see here, 7. They were down to 10 life. And they just have no clue how they lost half their life total on turn 1. They're scrambling to try to catch back up since they're relying on that removal spell, and they're screwed. Vines of Vastwood is alright to main deck, but I think Mutagenetic Growth is probably a better main deckable card. It's probably a better sideboard card for Vines of Vastwood. Domri Raid, Ajani, and Elspeth. Let's go into all 3 of them at once. They're both Planeswalkers. They really need no more introduction than that. They're like enchantment spells that give you free spells each turn and can fog. And all of these are better in certain situations. Ajani Vengeance is sort of a better control card. If you're ending up against a mid-range deck, then it's probably better. Well, actually, it's probably not better against the mid-range. It's probably better against the control deck. Or a combo deck, because you can tap down. You can keep their lands tapped down. It's also really good in the fact that it can be double as removal, and you Lightning Helix it, so it's better against aggro decks. But on the flip side, Elspeth will win you the aggro meter, not by putting out the 1/1 to blocks, even though that does happen so that you can just be aggressive and attack with your big creatures and just leave dumb 1/1s out to block their opposing Tarmogoyfs or whatever. It's really good against the mid-range deck and the fact that you can just jump over all their creatures, like the Tarmogoyf, beat face for extra lightning bolt damages on top of your creature's damage, and also put out 1/1s to block Tarmogoyfs. But Domri Raid is probably more main deckable than both of them. And also, just if I was going to go put a Planeswalker in this lower mana curve deck, I would do Domri simply because it's a 3 converted mana cost. And that's because it can give you gas, so it's great against tempo decks and control decks. And it's also not awful against aggro decks because you generally have bigger butts than the other aggro deck does. So, like, again, for example, Vault Scourge versus a Curdape. Curdape wins that battle. So it can double as removal if you need it. It's not the greatest removal in the world. It's not the greatest draw spell in the world, but in combination with the fact that it can draw, it can play removal, can play jacks of all trades, basically, and it can also be a win con for you if you get to, like, -7 against control, which I've done several times. You win the game. Basically, going -7 against control, you win the game. It doesn't matter how far ahead they are, you win the game, because everything you draw is not only a threat with haste, but it beats down right away and does double strike. And it's got trample, so it's not like they're blocking anything. If they block anything, they lose. Even their best threat, which is arguably Colonnade, loses against a double striking Curdape. Searing Blaze and Searing Blood are the other 2 cards. I would not main deck them unless you are very, very into red and you are having a lot of aggro in your area. They are basically how you beat out aggro. They allow you to be removal king and still be aggressive. How do you build Lands Core? Alright, so this one's a little weird. You'll see something down in the corner. We'll get there in a second. You want to have at least 8 to 12 fetches. I'm not going to tell you exactly what fetches you want to do because, again, it really depends on what color cards you're putting in. If you're putting in more red, obviously you're going to want more red. If you're putting in more green for things like main deck Vines of Vastwood, you're going to want more green. So you're going to want to have at least 8 to 12 fetches, depending on how juicy you want to do. I run around 10 personally. You're going to want around 3 basics. That's not an exception. There's no you want every time you get hit with a Path to Exile, and 3 will generally cover every single time you get hit with a Path to Exile. Reliably, that's Path to Exile and a Path to Exile plus Snapcaster Mage. You want to be able to fetch something and mana ramp into a ghor-clan Rampager or something. But it's good to have these basics anyways, including Blood Moon. There's a lot of red decks running around using Blood Moon lately. And it's just something you want to be aware of. Yes, it's a little weird that you're also main decking a red source, like a mountain, especially when you're worried about Blood Moon. But you also need to be worried about things like how much damage you're taking from your lands if you're against an aggro deck, or against Tribal Flame Zoo or any of those kinds of decks. As well as if you want to play around Tectonic Edge, and if you want to play around Ghost Quarter being that it'll hit your land and then you get yourself a mountain back again, as well as Spreading Seas. Your mountain can still get Spreading Seas, but at worst you want to still be able to get access to your red, especially against the Merfolk deck that uses the Spreading Seas. So that's what you're going to want to do. You're going to want about 5 to 6 fetches, or 5 to 6 shocks. Generally, you're going to want to go with the split of 2, 1, or 2, 3, 1, or 2, 2, 3 to 7, I know, but it's generally the splits you're going to want to do, and whatever's going to be the 3 there is going to be what you do a heavier color into. And you're going to want anywhere from 2 to 4 flex lands. If you do, you can, again, fill up your entire deck with just fetch lands, basics, and shocks. But if you have anything left over because you're around 18 and you want to pump it up to 20, then you're going to want to look at adding 2 to 4 fetch lands in there. Not fetch lands, flex lands. And what are those flex lands? Well, we have a bunch of different choices. You can choose man lands, and I've got them listed out here completely for you. We got Treetop Village, which is a 2 mana. It comes into play tapped, which is the downside. All of them come into play tapped, which is the downside. You can tap it for a green source, or you can pay 1 green and make it into a 3/3 with trample and add on that Beats with a monkey, so it fits the zoo theme. Stirring Wildwood, which comes into play tapped, allows you to grab a green or white mana. And for 3 mana, it will make your dude into a 3/4 with reach, making it a very good flying defender. Or Raging Ravine, which costs more than any of them. It costs 4, but it can make your dude into a 3/3, which is susceptible to Lightning Bolt before attack, but then attacking becomes a 4/4, and it holds the 1/1 counter and beats down harder and harder. This is better for more of your mid-range thing. If I was going to suggest a man lane, I would suggest Treetop Village. Stirring Wildwood is a little bit on the secondaries if you've got more like fairies or caws that you have to defend against. Raging Ravine is only if you are like playing aggro decks and you want to have a little bit of more game on them. Sinjiri Step is another one that you could main deck, and it's very good. It's basically a combat trick that you can play with Knight of the Reliquary. That's where it's best, although you can play it main deck on your own if you want. I don't suggest it. It lets you get a white land, and when it enters the battlefield, it gives you protection from any color of your choice to end a turn. I like saying purple when I put it down, play turn 2, if I don't have like any other play. Or orange. Both of them are very good choices. But you can also say things like, I play this from my hand, I want to give my creature protection from green. Look at that, all your creatures are green. I get to attack and alpha attack and kill you now with my Tarmogoyf. Or you can fetch it with Knight of the Reliquary in response to, like, for example, them terminating your Knight of the Reliquary, where you go, I will get this in response, it will come into play, it will resolve first, I give my Knight of the Reliquary protection from red. Look at that, I can not only block your creature that's attacking, but also it does not die. And it just sort of makes them discard a card, while making Knight of the Reliquary stronger because you sacrificed land to get it out there, so it gets bigger. Arena is, again, one of those cards that you're going to want to only play really with Knight of the Reliquary, and I wouldn't suggest it main deck, but if you're crazy, you can do it. It's one of those lands, and one of the only lands in Modern that I can think of off the top of my head, that does not produce mana. That is something to remember. Even though it says land, it took me a while, too, when I first realized that Arena didn't make mana. I always thought it made mana, but it doesn't. It's a land that does not make mana. It just has an effect. And that effect happens to be making creatures fight each other. Now, there's something a little weird where you say tap target creature you control and target creature opponent controls, and they deal damage to each other. They deal damage equal to their power to each other. So basically fight something, but it's an interesting sort of fight. because you are saying, I'm going to make my creature fight with whatever creature you want, and the opponent has to choose it. So it's better when they're only running like one creature, or they're just running a bunch of creatures that are all the same power and need each other, like lords. But you can also use it as a combat trick to tap down something before attackers are declared, if you want to just suicide one of your creatures and make it so that creature can't attack. It's colorless, so you can tap down things like Etch Champion if they've only got an Etch Champion. And the big thing here is that it's repeatable removal. That's the main thing of it. It's just repeatable removal. You can just continually lower their creatures down until they've got nothing. If you've got a giant Knight of the Reliquary, which is hopefully what you're fetching it with. Your other choices down here are what I call the colorless effect lands. You've got Kessig Wolf Run, Slayer's Stronghold, Gavany Township. To read them off, since you can't actually see them here, Kessig Wolf Run is X green red. Tap it, and you can make target creature gain trample and X in its power till end of turn. Only its power, not its toughness. And that's super valuable because you can just play it for tapping 3 mana, a Kessig Wolf Run, plus a red and a green to make your Knight of the Reliquary have trample, or your Tarmogoyf have trample. It also will make anything you top deck a threat and could win the game with your Kessig Wolf Run just by swinging out there, tapping all your lands, and making constant threats. Slayer's Stronghold's also kind of cool because it costs red and white, and you tap it, and you give target creature haste and vigilance till end of turn. It gives haste to all your creatures, so anytime you draw a creature, it's very good if you've got the extra mana to sink into it. It also gives it, I believe, +2, or maybe +1. Can't remember off the top of my head. It's not a lot. I think it's +1. That's good. It gives vigilance, which is cool against other aggro decks because it means that you can be aggressive while still having things to block with. It's really, really cute to pull out with Knight of the Reliquary because you can give Knight of the Reliquary vigilance and attack with it, and that means does not tap. And then you leave it up to block, so you've got a big-ass blocker. And then you tap your Knight of the Reliquary at the end of turn, and you can grab a fetch land, crack it, and make it bigger so it attacks even more. And you can do cute stuff like that with Maze of Ith at the end of the combat phase if Maze of Ith was legal in Modern, which it's not. It's legal in Legacy, but it's like the Modern equivalent of it. Horizon Canopy is also a super great land, totally main deckable. It does make you lose life, so if you're playing against a meta of nothing but aggro decks, I would not suggest it, because it will add up. But at worst, it gives you the mana fixing that you need, and does not pump your Loom Lions, Curt Apes, and Wild Noctills, but generally that's okay because they're going to be pumped by any of your other fetch lands that you've just sacrificed for a shock land to make correct pump. But if you draw it late game, which is where you want to draw it, it is I play this land, I sacrifice it with one of my basic extra lands, I'm in a crunch, I need a burn, just drew my burn, now you're dead. So it cycles, which is good. The other choices that you have are like Firelit Thicket, Copperline Gorge, and Rootbound Crag. Notice they're all the same color. You can get any of those Naya colors than that. And it does the same thing, which is just mana fixing. It's just mana fixing. I would play Copperline Gorge and the fast lands before I play Rootbound Crag, which I would play before I'd play Firelit Thicket and the filtered lands. Because you're going to want reliable, fast mana up to around turn 4, and Copperline Gorge covers that up till around turn 3. Here's the meta as it stands as recording of this video. You've got rock decks, which include things like Jund and Junk, and things like rock, just strictly red-black. You've got things like Affinity, Hexproof, Control, Escape Shift, Tron, Pod, Twin, Living End, Death and Taxes / Hate Bears, Merfolk, Zoo, Storm, Infect, Delver, Soul Sisters, Red Deck Wind / Burns, Mono Green Shrine, Ad Nauseam, and 8-Rack. 8-Rack's one of those decks that you're not going to really see very often in Paper Magic, but unless it's like an F&M, if you're going to like a bigger event, you're really not going to see it all that much. But is on the online meta because it's a cheap deck to put together, and it's kind of a cool idea. Mono Green Shrine is sort of in the same direction, where it's not necessarily the most competitive deck, but it's a cool deck, so people will play it. What do you do against Hexproof? Well, you got a couple options here. M14 gave us a cool option in the form of Celestial Flare, which is my go-to card if you're going to go against playing Hexproof. The other ones deal with sort of the symptoms and are not necessarily great in sideboard regardless. But this makes the target player sacrifice an attacking creature. Generally, they're only going to be attacking you with one creature, and it's going to be super troned up. And you're going to go ahead and kill it, and make them lose everything, and shoot them back to square one. And they're only running like 12 creatures, tops 14 creatures. So it's not like getting rid of one of the creatures is going to be like a meh thing for them. They'll replace it. They probably don't have another creature in their hand. Your other options are Destructive Revelry, Deglamour, Wear, and Tear. These are things that are going to be probably in your sideboard regardless. And they're good to side in. They're probably the only good thing to side in. Your other option is Back to Nature, which blows out the Hexproof matchup, but sucks against most everything else. It destroys all enchantments, which is alright if you side it against things like Twin, but it's only ever alright because it doesn't get both sides of the field, where it also can be sided against Affinity, allowing you to condense your sideboard up. But if you do have like 2 Hexproof decks in your meta and your like play group or FNM, then Back to Nature is a good choice for you. Now let's talk about Hexproof as a whole. What is Hexproof? Hexproof is a deck that wants to put many enchantments on one Hexproof creature so you can't target it and kill it in response, and then win the game. It is not a good matchup for us. We can race them. We can deal as much damage as they deal to us. But they have many things in their deck that allow them to get first strike if they need to go on the defensive and just kill our creatures. They also have many things that give lifelink, and when their one single creature is able to gain them 9 life, it is not cool for us. So it is not a good matchup for us. If they didn't have any form of lifelink, it would be a fine matchup. I'd say 50-50, it's a race. Since they do have lifelink, not 50-50. Closer to probably 85-15 to us. 15 being, do they stumble? Did they run out of mana? Did they not get the lifelink stuff? A lot of variables that are like, I hope you didn't draw correctly because I'll die. When siding in Back to Nature and Celestial Flare, your matchup might go finally to 50-50. It says if you draw it, you're probably going to win the game. If you don't draw it, you will lose the game. If you're only siding in things like Destructive Revelry, your matchup probably goes to like 75, I would say, on their favor, because you have to hit the lifelink, and if they got a lifelink to replace it, or they double lifelink, then you're screwed. Control. We got a little bit of a crazy setup here. Control. What defines a control deck in Modern? Well, it wants to control everything you do, then drop a bomb and win the game. Yes, there are Grixis control decks, and this does apply to this, but this is mostly towards American control decks, which tries to still, again, control the board state, mostly. That's why it's got red and white in it, and win the game through that. So what are they going to do against you? They're going to be using all the Lightning Helixes, Lightning Bolts, Snapcasters, and Path to Exiles they could possibly do. How do you defend against it? Well, Mutagenic Growth is a great defense against Lightning Bolt, Lightning Helix. Binds of Vastwood's even better if you've got the mana, because it means their Lightning Helix will not gain them any life. Boros Charm can be used to null out one removal spell, but is better against board wipes like Supreme Verdict. And all of them are great to have against this deck. Another thing you can do is mess with their mana base. You've got things like Blood Moon, Choke, and Molten Rain. If I had to rate which is better against control, you would do Choke as number 1, Molten Rain as number 3, and probably Blood Moon as number 2. Why do I rate it like that? Well, Choke is really good against the decks that run islands, and that is not a deck that we are. So it is a 3 mana. They tapped out maybe to do something like Cryptic Command your team. You drop down the Choke and you say, good luck. You can only untap 1 land every turn, or something along those lines. And it really screws with them. Blood Moon is, on the other end, is probably number 2, because they do run things like Celestial Colonnades, and Blood Moon stops Celestial Colonnade from existing. It still gives them access to mountains, which means they can still bolt the crap out of things, and it's a one-trick pony, so they will fetch like a basic plains and a basic island next game in order to null out your Blood Moon. So it's an alright choice there. Molten Rain's better against mid-range decks than it is against control decks, but it's still fine because you're basically saying, we're not going to lit game. I know you want it to be turn 4 with 4 mana, but it's actually going to be turn 3 because you only have 3 mana on turn 3. You're on turn 4, but it's turn 3. And by lengthening out the short game for you, the early game, you make it better and more in your control, because control wants to get to about 4 mana and then start winning the game. If you deny them that, you're saying you'll only get to 4 mana on turn 6 rather than turn 4, then you are really screwing them. Domri Raid, of course, is in here, because Domri Raid, if you drop at turn 3 and it does not get countered, you will win the game. I have not lost a game of Magic against a control deck where I've dropped Domri Raid turn 3 and they haven't countered it. I have not lost a game. I play a lot of Zoo. Over 100 matches where I've dropped Domri Raid turn 3, I've won 100 games. He is amazing. If they burn your creatures, you draw a creature, put it out there, say, good luck, you went ahead and made me lose a creature, I've replaced it, whatever. If they drop some kind of Snapcaster to try to do some weird blocks mechanics, you can kill it. You're so rarely using the -2 though, you're generally plussing 1 it all the time, which means you're getting more card advantage than control. That is actually saying something. If you were reliably drawing a card every turn where control basically cycles their cards, you are drawing more cards than a control deck. You are getting more you are an aggro deck getting more CA than a control deck is, which is saying something. And not only that, you are getting threats, and you are +1ing him to his ultimate, and when ultimate happens, they lose the game. He's a ticking time bomb. He will win the game for you. Because even if they board wipe, you will still win the game with haste. They can't target your creatures with any of their bolts anymore, and it's got trample and double strike. You will win all the combats. All of the combats. What is a control's matchup against Zoo? I would say probably about... it really depends on the skill of you. The skill of your player that you're playing against and the skill that you are at. As a highly skilled Zoo player, I'm not claiming to be a highly skilled Magic player, but a highly skilled Zoo player, I will say that my matchup has generally been in my favor, probably around 60-40. If you are less good at Zoo and you're not thinking turns ahead of time how to maximize your damage with the least amount of risk, considering that they've got removal, then it probably goes down to about 40% in your favor, 60% in their favor. If you are siding these cards in, it jumps up dramatically. The only thing they will side in against you is things like more removal, more burn, or more board wipes. And if you've got the counteract in the form of Vines of Vastwood, Mutagenic Growth, or Boros Charm, you will win the game. If they tap out and then you put out Choke, you will win the game. Your answers to a control deck are better than their situational answers that they're trying to answer several decks with. Your cards are more narrow-focused and more powerful, while theirs are broader and less powerful. Rock decks. I put all the rock decks together here as sort of just something that you'll do, because you generally will side in all of these cards, with the exception of Molten Rain and Blood Moon, against Jund, black mid-range, Obliviator, and also against Junk. Vines of Vastwood, Mutagenic Growth. I already went over it earlier. It nulls out removal in the form of burn. That's huge. Vines of Vastwood nulls out all removal. Mutagenic Growth nulls out burn. Against Jund decks, this is pivotal. It even works against rock decks a bit if they're running things like Drowned in Sorrow, or any of the negative stuffs, because you're giving yourself a Mutagenic Growth pump. Vines of Vastwood will cover all your bases. It'll stop Abrupt Decay. It'll stop Terminate. It'll stop anything. It'll Putrefy. It'll stop everything they're trying to do. Moving on to Scavenging Ooze, it makes their Tarmogoyf smaller. That's pretty much your use for it. I mean, it has occasional uses against like the rock decks, like the things like Finks or Voice of Resurgence, but it makes Tarmogoyf smaller, and that's its general use. Chain to the Rocks is also Tarmogoyf stuff. You'll see a lot of stuff trying to beat their bigger stuff. It's a mid-range deck, so they've got bigger creatures than you. And Chain to the Rocks acts as Path to Exile 5, 6, 7. 8 if you really need that many in your sideboard, but I wouldn't suggest it. And it's pretty good against it. It's sorcery speed, which isn't the best thing in the world, but it will get rid of a Tarmogoyf and allow you to keep being down for 1 mana. Flame Slash will get rid of Tarmogoyf depending on how big the Tarmogoyf is. If the Tarmogoyf is already a 3/4 and there's no sorceries in the graveyard, then it's not going to get rid of Tarmogoyf. But it will get rid of things like Scavenging Ooze. It'll get rid of things like Obstinate Baloth or Luxodon Smiter. Any of sort of their bigger mid-rangey cards that you're going to need to fight against. Speaking of bigger mid-rangey cards that you're going to need to fight against, Mark of Mutiny, Traitor's Blood, and Active Aggression are my current sideboard tech that I use against them. And it's amazing because you've got them down to around, let's say, 8 life-ish when they stabilize, and now they're like, cool, I'm going to go ahead and kill you now. And they're going to start attacking. That's when you can use Active Aggression specifically, because it's instant speed, to steal one of their creatures, make it block, they trade for both their creatures, your small creatures attack, and they're dead. Or you steal their Tarmogoyf, give it Trample with hopefully Traitor's Blood, or if they've got nothing to block against, the Active Aggression does it anyways. Mark of Mutiny gives it a 1/1 counter. And you kill them with their own creatures, which is fantastic. Molten Rain, Blood Moon. These are kind of Jund and Rock specifically that you're going to want to go against. Or a Jundeef, it's crazy, and they're doing all the colors. Blood Moon, not the best here. Molten Rain's a little bit better currently because they're packing Anger of the Gods in their deck, so it might actually help mana fix them. But Molten Rain will destroy them. Basically, they want to get to about 3 to 4 mana to start switching the game from your game to their game. And if you do not let them do that by keeping their lands small, then you will win the game. Also, it deals damage to their face, which is still letting you be aggressive. Scapeshift and Tron. These are both sort of put into one category because they are kind of the same deck. They're trying to win by having lots of mana, or lots of lands. And that's where Blood Moon, Molten Rain, and Sowing Salt will help you out against. Sowing Salt's better against Tron than it is against Scapeshift. Scapeshift is only really good against them if you hit their Valakut, because they put out an early Valakut and then you hit them with Sowing Salt. Sowing Salt's a little bit more on the pricey end. You're going to look at things more like Blood Moon and Molten Rain, which will slow them down in the form of Scapeshift. It'll slow them down at least, or cut them off of green completely, which is awesome because then you're really screwing with them. Even if you manage to only cut them off of green by 1, you're stopping Scapeshift from happening. And the flip end is also Boros Charm. They're all, this one specifically, Jund and Control is packing a little bit of Anger of the Gods, probably about 2 of. They're packing probably around 4 of Anger of the Gods in their sideboard, or Oblivion Stones, which wipe your board anyways, so you're going to want to do things like Boros Charm specifically against them, because they're going to rely on Fire Spout or the such to kill you and wipe your creatures. If you Boros Charm and say, nope, then you win the game, because then you attack, on the attack back they lose, because they're not interacting with you at all. On the other hand, you'll see I've got things a little bit separated here with Declaimer and Stony Silence. Stony Silence does not help you against Scapeshift at all, but will help you against Tron, specifically if you are on the play, because it stops them from using Map. Expedition Map is their main way of getting their Tron pieces, and that's something that you're going to use to destroy them. It also stops O-Stone from existing, and a lot of their other sort of like, I can't remember what it's called, but the effects that, the eggs effects that allow them to cycle a mana and draw a card. It's also good to have Declaimer in that situation, because it'll allow you to get rid of their O-Stones if it's not activated and they don't have mana to activate it. It'll also allow you to get rid of Worm Coil without any Worm Coil babies happening. And it occasionally is good against Scapeshift only if they're using the Prismatic Omen version of Scapeshift. Affinity. Oh, and worth noting about the Scapeshift matchup, if they were to put out the Omen before Blood Moon, then you put out Blood Moon, you've timestamped Blood Moon later, so all their lands are mountains. If they put out Prismatic Omen after you put out Blood Moon, then their lands are all what is every mana type it can possibly be. So Blood Moon's basically just crappy. It's just only hurting you at that point. Affinity. Notice we have a lot of cards against Affinity. That's because Affinity is very easily hated out in the Naya colors. We have red to burn them, white to exile their stuff, and green to get rid of artifacts. Red also gets rid of artifacts, so does white. We have a ton of ways to kill them. Now, in the Affinity matchup, you are... Oh no, yeah, I forgot about this. In this matchup, I'd say game 1, you're favored if you're on the play. If you're not on the play, you're still about 50-50. After that, if you don't draw into a way to hate them, I'd say it goes about 40-60, but you still have the race option, and if they fumble, you win. Affinity is about, I'd say, depending on your main deck setup. If you have a lot of burn, probably about 50-50. If you don't have a lot of burn, then go ahead and call it about 40-60 in their favor. They're the faster deck, they're more explosive, they can win the game. Because of that. If you race, you will lose. That's just how it's going to go. They're going to attach cranial planing and you'll lose the game. Especially if they put it on the lifelink creature. They also have more varied approaches of attacking. It's not just straight attacking. They can attack in the air, which means you can't really block them. So it gets a little bit worse. You are the control deck in this situation, meaning your burn is going to not be used to the face to end the game. It's going to be used towards their creatures to slow them down. When you side in things, Ancient Grudge being one of the best things you can side in, Destructive Revelry, Declaimer, and Stony Silences are also things you can side in. Stony Silence is killer because it basically destroys their deck. It also stops their lands from producing mana in most cases. It stops actually most of their mana production, which is why it's really good. It's like a 2-mana, one-sided Blood Moon. Or Armageddon, I should just say. It's just an Armageddon. Declaimer's great here too. In the fact that it can get rid of cranial platings, but it's also just removal for 2 mana for any reason. Same thing as Destructive Revelry while hitting their face. It's basically a searing, it's like a 1 damage less searing blood. And you've got Ancient Grudge, which is awesome here because it allows you to destroy 2 things for 3 mana and 2 separate occasions at instant speed, which is better than Creep and Corrosion in our deck because we have a lower mana curve. But if you do manage to Creep and Corrosion and Shatterstorm at 4 mana, you will win the game because that kills everything. It's Wrath of God, that also has an Armageddon, that also has a Pernicious Deed effect to it too. It just wrecks them. Searing Blood, Searing Blaze is also good. If you have it in your main deck, I wouldn't necessarily sideboard it in against them. But if it's a main deck card, it's just more removal, and that's good against them. Pyroclasm and Volcanic Fallout are also awesome against them, because it basically wipes the board. It does not kill. Note that it will have 2 damage checked on the Etched Champion, and it won't kill it. However, because it's got protection from red, if it has, if it manages to lose Metalcraft because you've wiped out all their other creatures, however, it will kill the Etched Champion. The Etched Champion won't die right away. It'll watch all of its friends die and then be so sad it will just let the 2 damage kill it. That's pretty much how it rolls. Affinity matchup after sideboarding goes super into your favor, because generally you are going to have probably 2 Destructive Revelries, some distribution of like 3 Ancient Grudges, 3 Destructive Revelries, 3 Stony Silence, some mix of that, and probably something like 1 Volcanic Fallout or 1 form of removal that you can side in, like Chain the Rocks or something. And suddenly you're looking at having like upwards to 18 to 20 spells to use removal against them, and it becomes super in your favor. Pod is not in your favor. Why is it not in your favor? Well, not only is it a mid-range deck, which just isn't really in your favor in general, it is also a combo deck, which is not in our favor at all. Mid-range, we can maybe race against. Combo, we'll lose. So we have the downside of Pod being just 2 bad matchups in one. And the fact that if we nuke out their mid-range matchup, they still have a combo win that they can win with. if we nuke out their combo matchup, they still have a mid-range way they can win. However, if you still manage to catch them off their guard, you sideboard it incorrectly, and you go fast, you can still win. Sometimes you can just outrace them regardless. Stony Silence is the only artifact card, the only artifact hate card I would side in. It only affects their pod and occasionally their what do you call it? Their Spellskite. But it's the only one I would side in because it's proactive. You don't have to have mana open, you don't have to be worried about it constantly, whatever. Grafdigger's Cage, on the other hand, great. Because it stops both their mid-range plans of trying to persist your red caps and their kitchen fixes, but it also stops pod from existing. On the other hand, you also got Aven Mind Sensor, which can nuke their mana occasionally, but more importantly stops pod while being aggressive, and they generally only have 4 to 5 ways of dealing damage to it, or dealing with the Aven Mind Sensor, and it can go to the air, which is important too. Pillar Flame's good because it can be used against the face, but more importantly, it gets rid of Finks once and for all. Same thing with Chain to the Rocks. It can get, not only can Chain to the Rocks get rid of Finks, it can get rid of everything, which is important because they side in things like Obstinate Baloths against us. Topra Orbs stop the combo, but that's about it. It's not the best thing in the world to side in against them, although they do have a lot of end-of-the-battlefield effects, so it does nuke their deck. Scavenging Ooze is good, especially if you have main deck, but if you have a sideboard as well, because it can eat things like Finks on the stack and stops their combo, while still being good and being able to get more power and toughness and sort of just deal damage through their bigger creatures. Twin. We have a bunch of different options here. Alright, so Twin, we have Deep Glamour, and we have, I don't think we have Tarmo Twin here. Yeah, okay. Just Twin, and we've got Deep Glamour, Destructive Revelry. That stops their combo, is what it does. Is it stops the Twin aspect of their combo. They can still combo off with the Kikijiki, but it stops their Twin combo. Wear and Tear also on there, stopping the Twin, or the Splinter Twin. Combust, on the other hand, hits the other side of that combo. It kills the what do you call it? It kills their Pestermite and their Deceiver Etcharch, which they're trying to do with the Twin, the Splinter Twin, or the Kikijiki to make 1,000,000 copies and kill you with 1,000,000 copies of those cards. So Combust is really good in this matchup specifically because it can kill any of their blue creatures and they can't counter it, which is important, and it also can't be prevented. So I don't... Can it be... Can't be redirected to Spellskite, right? Because it's not a blue creature. Because this isn't Commander, and it's not considered blue. Torpor Orb is good because it stops their combo from ever existing. They have to then go to their default sort of tempo way of winning, which isn't the best for them, and we're very good against tempo decks. Unlike Pod, which we're bad against their other half, which is mid-range, we're awesome against tempo decks. So once you put that out, you basically win the game. Burning Tree Shaman stops them from being able to combo off and winning the game, probably. Choke will stop their mana if they tap out at ever, and win you the game because they can't cast anything. Vines of Vastwood's a little bit of an interesting thing. There's a reason why I saved it to last, and that's because it can actually stop the combo and make them lose the game. Little interesting because you would think that, like, okay, well, the way that I normally use Vines of Vastwood defensively is to give my dude Hexproof, so why giving their dude Hexproof would it allow me to stop their game plan? Well, it doesn't actually give them Hexproof. It means they can't give their creature, they can't be the target spells or abilities the opponents control. That's not Hexproof. That's more, I guess, troll hiding. And what that does is that stops, like, for example, if they have a Kikijiki on the field and Deceiver Etcharch, and they tap the Deceiver Etcharch targeting, or tap the Kikijiki targeting the Deceiver Etcharch, you can pay 1 mana, not with a kicker, you might as well not give it a kicker, you just pay 1 mana, and say your creature can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponent control until end of turn. That means that the Kikijiki trigger fizzles because it can no longer has a legal target and stays tapped. They have a 1/4 and hopefully you can overrun them. better solution is, let's say they've got a Splinter Twin. You can then go ahead and say, in response to you casting Splinter Twin, to target your your Deceiver Esh-Arch, I will cast it for 1 mana. It can't be the target of spells or abilities you control. That includes your enchantment Splinter Twin. It falls off. You can also do it, I believe, and this, don't quote me on this, but I can also believe you can do it when they try to combo off and you target their thing that has the Splinter Twin on it, and their Splinter Twin will, not only will a Splinter Twin fall off, but it won't be a legal target for the token, and the token won't be able to untap it. Therefore, it will fizzle at the end of turn. You have a tapped creature, and you can just alpha attack straight through. A little weird, I know, but it's a good card. Living End. We're getting to Scavenging Ooze, Tupper Orb, Relic of Progenitus. Note that the Grafdigger's Cage not on the list because it does not actually stop Living End's combo, which is to do a Cascade spell, find yourself a Living End, get all the creatures that they cycled out of the graveyard, and make you lose all your creatures and kill you. Note that when they Living End at instant speed, it's an instant speed Wrath, which sucks, but there are ways around that, like doing things like if you can kill any of your creatures, you can kill any of your creatures for it and they'll come back to life, or doing a 2 mana in order to ghor-clan Rampagers, basically giving yourself a 2 mana ghor-clan Rampager free casted, as well as doing extra damage early on. So it's really great on that respect. Scavenging Ooze is very good because they can eat their creatures before they Living End. Hopefully it's probably only going to eat 1 or 2 of their creatures, but that's still enough to really screw them up. Relic, you can sort of do it as you go along before you have to blow it up completely and remove the entire graveyard. Crypt is on the plus side of being free. Bojuka Bog's on this list only if somehow you manage to get your Knight of the Reliquary out before they Living End. You can Bojuka Bog in response and exile their all of their stuff. Thalia is also good here. Thalia is a little weird because of how Cascade says you may cast this without paying its mana cost. Thalia still taxes it. So if they were to go ahead and do their Cascade spell, first off, their Cascade spell is going to cost 4 mana, not 3 mana to put out, giving you an extra turn for attack, but it's also going to cost 1 more mana to do the Cascade. Fun fact, if they try to Cascade with the Thalia out, not knowing that they're cascading into something that's going to cost 1 mana to have that Cascade's ability to resolve, it will not resolve, and they will still lose the game. It's kind of cool. Rule of Law on Aethersworn Canonist also stops the Cascade spell because they can Cascade, but then the second one can't be resolved, and that's game. Death and Taxes and Hate Bears. Well, you basically got a very simple option here. You want to do a Flame Slash or you want to do a Combust. Combust will allow you against the white stuff, Flame Slash will allow you to kill all of their creatures, pretty much. It's just extra burn. It allows you to get rid of their mid-range stuff. Also, ghor-clan Rampager is fantastic against this decks because it allows you to get over the bigger creatures and just get that last end hate. I'd say Death, Taxes, and Hate Bear, so long as you don't lose your lands, become probably a 75-25 in your favor. If you start losing your lands, it goes down to 55, maybe 40 in your, well, not your favor. It goes down to 55% your favor, maybe 40% not your favor, depending on how badly you're losing your lands. You may want to sideboard in your Destructive Revelry or your Enchantment Hates because of things like Sarah's, not Sarah's Embrace, but the enchantment that does not allow them to die. It keeps them at 1 life so long as they have a creature, which you can get around by killing their creature and then attacking and just winning the game, or killing just that thing and just winning the game in general. Merfolk. Alright, here's where you maybe want to side in your Destructive Revelry, but probably not. Because they are going to be using Ether Vial, most definitely. This may use Ether Vial. you're more likely to side in the artifact enchantment hate here because it can hit either via Spell Skite and the Sarah's enchantment card that I'm brain farting on. This one you're probably not going to side in at all. Combust is really good against them because it's removal, and not only is it removal that can pretty much kill all their lords, but it's also removal that can get around Kira something spinner. Bubble spinner? I don't know. But it can get around that because it can't be prevented, it can't be countered by spells or abilities, which means it's going to kill it, allowing you to go ahead and nuke whatever you need to. Not only that, Pyroclast and Volcanic Fallout fall in that situation too, especially Volcanic Fallout because it can't be countered. And it will deal 2 damage to pretty much everything, killing all their stuff. At worst, you can attack with your creatures and then Volcanic Fallout, so it's allowing you to basically trade everything. Flame Slash again being more removal, Searing Blaze more removal, Chain to Rocks more removal. You want to be a removal deck against them because you can't keep their Lord deck from having a million lords out. The Zoo deck. Alright, the Zoo deck, you might think this is where you want to have things like Vines of Vastwood or Mutagenic Growth to null out like Path to Exiles and Lightning Bolts, but it's not actually true. It's a vouch for board position, but not in the way that you want to vouch for your board position. You want to vouch for their lack of board position, and that's where Searing Blaze, Searing Blood is awesome against. Flame Slash, Chain to the Rocks, anything that could wipe their board or deal damage to their creatures is acceptable here. Things like Kitchen Finks, even though it's the bane of our deck, you can side it in against our deck, which exists if you've got like a lot of aggro in your meta. You're going to have it in your sideboard anyways. Does allow you to block their creatures, have them die, gain some life off of it, stall the game while being aggressive yourself. Storm, we got a lot of creature choices here. Scavenging Ooze, Tormad's Crypt, Relic of Progenitus, Grafdigger's Cage, Bajuka Bog, they all fall in the same thing, they're Graveyard Hate. Why are they Graveyard Hate? Well, you have 2 different ways to Graveyard Hate them. One, they're going to try to give it flashback with Passing Flames to try to double up on their Storm count and get that's one of their engines that they win with. One of their 3 engines they're going to try to win with. The other thing that you're going to do here is it can also null out stuff like Pyromancer's Ascension, which needs cards in the graveyard for it to become active. So if you proactively nuke it with things like Tormad's Crypt, or better ones with taxing it with the Scavenging Ooze and the Relic of Progenitus, you're going to look at yourself much farther ahead. The other way you can attack it is to attack its other engine, its second engine, which is going to be the Pyromancer's Ascension, which you can do with Declaimer, Wear and Tear, Destructive Revelry, anything that gets sort of enchantments. The third engine that it's going to use to try to beat you in order to get its storm count up and lethal you is the Goblin Electromancer, which you already have a million ways to deal with it in your main deck with all your burn spells and all your Path to Exiles. You get rid of it, you gotta get rid of it early. Another attack to hate on Storm with is to hate on its storm count. How do you do that? Well, you can either do Rule of Law or Aethersworn Canonist. Mindbreak Trap specifically is pretty good here because you can go ahead and say, alright, you're doing your whole thing, okay, you've got the Lethal Storm, guess what, you casted way more than 3 spells this turn, meaning I don't have to pay for Mindbreak Trap because I could never pay for it, but I'm going to get rid of all of your spells, and not only am I going to get rid of all your spells, I'm going to exile them so you can't even flash back your Grape Shot. It's fantastic in that respect. The other way is Rule of Law or Aethersworn Canonist, which are going to be saying, like, you cannot do Storm because you cannot cast more than 1 spell a turn. Now, they can still do things like do They can still cast something to kill it, like a Lightning Bolt, and then try to do their thing or try to bounce it, but it's still a better card that you can put in there. Thalia and Eldion, whatever. The Great Revel, pyrostatic pillar on legs, because he is a pyrostatic pillar. Look at that guy. Is great against them. It will win you the game hands down. You don't have to worry about it. And that's because you're basically saying that if you want to do anything, if you want to dig into your deck to try to get a way to get rid of these two cards, it will hurt you. Or it will take up your entire turn. If you're trying to win regardless without it, you will lose the game. It's just that's how it rolls. Storm is a pretty bad game 1 matchup because you've got really no defense against them. But if you have your Storm defense in game 2, you will probably win the game. I would say it goes from being about maybe 35 to 40% in not your favor to jumps to about 65 to 75% in your favor. And the reason why you have it even higher, you have that highish sort of 35%, which we don't normally have against combo decks, in game 1 is because Storm, it really is a turn 2 deck, so or turn 4 deck, turn 5 deck, so you can race them, and some of the times you can hit them hard enough that they go down to about 5 life, and they really need to do free probes, and they can't do it because of the life loss, and you'll win the game. Infect. Alright, Infect, you're going to be the control deck. How are you going to be the control deck? You're going to remove everything they own ever. You want to maybe do it in response to their pump spells, but if they're tapped out, you're going to want to just kill their creature, because then they're going to be spending all their mana on casting more creatures, and then you just kill it while they're tapped out. That's the best way that you can do it. Eldilon is also really good here because it's allowing you to be aggressive, and when they attack, or when they try to do the pump spells for Infect, it hurts them, and since they need to go into attack phase before, or they wouldn't need to go into attack phase after they do the pump spells, you have a chance of killing them. Thalia, again, also very good, although I would say less good than the Great Revel, and the reasoning why is because it stops you from doing a lot of removal, and they'll just slow roll their pumps instead. Chain to the Rocks, again, also really, really good. Something I like to do is to, like, do a burn spell and force them to have to pump in response, so now they've got 2 to 3 pump spells on their creature, and then Path to Exile or Chain to Rocks it. Delver's a great matchup for you. You very rarely lose against Delver. The only way you can lose against Delver if they have every Lightning Bolt in the world, and they manage to stick a young Pyromancer and protect it while simultaneously killing all your stuff, which means they would have to have really a god hand. Any of these cards you see here is really good against them. You'll see a ton of removal. Protection with Vines of Vast Mutagenetic Growth also being a good card is good against them. Anything that kills their creatures good against them. Choke, which is their primary mana base, because they're going to be pretty much only red and blue, will kill them. Thalia's will slow roll them down long enough that you can just win the game. Dominate Raid acts as creature removal and allows you to outgas them while having a win con, so like control, it just wins the game for you. It's a very good matchup. I'd say Delver is probably about 75-25 in your favor, and after sideboarding, if you even are able to grab 3 of these cards, I would say it jumps up even more to about 80 to 85% in your favor. Soul Sisters is not in your favor. That's because it's one of those random matchups. Soul Sisters is not really a great deck, but it does have some really good matchups and some really bad matchups, and you are one of the really good matchups. Strictly because you're trying to attack them down life-wise, you can still win just by being aggressive and by killing all their creatures if possible. Volcanic Fallout is huge against the deck. So is Torpor Orb because it turns off 8 of their cards, aka the Sisters. If you have a lot of them in your meta, I would suggest things like Skullcracker Flames the Blood Hand. Sudden Shock is also something you can use to turn off their Martyr of the Sands. But generally, I would say it's if you can race at 50-50, if you have a slower hand, it drops down to like 25% not in your favor. If you manage to sideboard in Volcanic Fallout and you can hit it turn 3, then you're looking at probably jumping up to about 75% in your favor. If you don't, again, it's that race option. If you don't have the race option, you lose. Mono Green Shrine, alright, we're getting to some of the worser decks, but are popular because they're cool. This is not in your favor, and the reason why is because it's just going to excel out a giant thing and kill you. If you're on the play, then you're looking at Aethersworn Canonist is pretty good. Gaydok Tag is very good against their Primeval Command. And the Genesis Wave, and also Aven Mindsets is good against the Primeval Command, yeah, I think that's what it's called. Try to slow down their searching of their deck for the right cards that they need to win. Volcanic Fallout is a beating against them. If you Volcanic Fallout at the right point in time, you can wipe down their deck, leave them with only a couple mana, and it really screws them because they rely hard on that Shrine and the abilities of, like, Arbor Elf to untap their lands and get double down on their lands. Pyroclasm being also in the same respect. Molten Rain's not so great here because you're probably going to hit a forest with it, but it's also good against Shrine, but it's not the best thing in the world. It's not like you're color screwing them or really setting them back very long. It's just if you have it in your sideboard, you might as well side with it. Ad Nauseam. Alright, Ad Nauseam is one of these newer decks that's actually really tough. It plays a lot like Storm, so you'll see there's a lot of things in here that are very reminiscent of Storm, with the exception of Molten Rain, as well as the Destructive Revelry, Declamor, and Wear and Tear. Why is the Declamor, Wear and Tear, Destructive Revelry different? Well, it's basically you're going to be land hating. That's right, land hating. You are going to be using Molten Rain to get rid of their lands, not allow them to get to about 5 mana, and Destructive Revelry, Declamor, Wear and Tear is going to hit their prismatic something or other, whatever it is that allows them to get their enchantment plussing of mana. As long as you're like getting rid of their short-term mana ramp with your artifact kill, Stony Silence also a good one here, you're gonna really nuke them. And you're just gonna go ahead and race them. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. Everything here you see is the same deal as Storm. 8-Rack, again, one of those decks that aren't so great, but is popular. So you're going to need to know how to defend against it. We're actually really good in it. I would say we are probably 90% favored on Game 1. Game 2, we are probably also 90% favored if you side in any of these cards. If you're not, we probably drop down to maybe about 75%, which is still strongly favored. But you need to know this. While, yes, they can kill you with their, with their Shrieking Affliction and their rack pieces, what artifacts you're really going to want to kill is the Entangling Bridge, the Ensnaring Bridge. And the reason why you want to kill that is because that's going to be their main way to say, don't attack me anymore. You might want to also side in your Boros Charms in case they're running things like board wipes like Damnation, which is a lesser thing that they do. They mostly run in things like Drowned in Filth, or Drowned in Sorrow, which has -3/-3. So it can kill some of your stuff, but not like things like Tarmogoyf, so you're still probably going to win. But you're going to want to make sure you kill the bridge, because that's going to stop everything from attacking. Not only that, Wear and Tear is amazing here. In other places, it's just alright. It's just basically another form of Destructive Revelry that doesn't deal damage. But Wear and Tear here is great, because you can fuse them together, get yourself rid of a bridge and a Shrieking Affliction, which is awesome. Not only that, you're going to discard them out your hand mostly anyways. It's just race them. Just race them. They've got no way to deal with you, and you're going to beat them turn 4, turn 5. Burn Red Deck wins. This is a pretty weird matchup. It's not in our favor because Red Deck wins is a bit more in our favor matchup-wise. Burn is not in our favor, and that's because of our lands. I would suggest you to fetch basic lands if you can. If you can't, it's going to happen. Kitchen Finks is all right here, not the best in the world against Burn, but better against Red Deck wins. Rest for the Weary, weirdly enough, can blow them out because it's gaining 8 life wins you the game. And then Thalia, also a really good card here, because it will slow down their burn to being non-existent. They run a very low land count, so if you get them stuck on 1 land, 2 lands, you can basically make it so that they're only burning one burn a turn, or if they waste it on Thalia, it's not going in your face, at least. Alright, now that we got that, let's do a damage in the blinds.
Nice small zoo. We draw one lander, which isn't the best thing in the world, but we are going second, so it's not the worst. We have access to at least a stomping ground to do most of our stuff, and get a wild Noctil out there. Although we could be cheeky and get out of Temple Garden and have to exile our own dude, which is rarely the correct choice. This guy is thinking hard about whether or not he should mulligan, I guess. Alright, so he's finally getting started. I don't think he's doing anything for turn 1, which is always a good thing for me. I draw myself something that's not land as much as I'd like it to be. We'll grab ourselves a stomping ground here. Pay the 2 life, put out the wild Noctil, and go to town. Maybe he'll path to exile my dude right now. Yeah, it's not gonna happen. He's gonna see that I don't have anything. I guess he could take the lightning bolt, which would be the best thing to take. Take a Tarmogoyf. He could be dumb and take anything but the lightning bolt. But if I draw a land, I get my lightning bolt back. He loses his creature. If I get, he took lightning helix? Seems crazy. It allows me to get my card back, and yes, I didn't draw the land there, but I'm still heading in for 2. And it makes my Tarmogoyf gigantic. 4 or 5 off of 3 cards. If I draw, you know, a Tarmogoyf. That's it? Alright, whatever, dude. I guess we should just attack. See if he's got anything that he's gonna do here. Drop ourselves a forest and put out a Curdy. And then pass the turn. Not in the best shape. We'd really like to have ourselves a, you know, plains. But we will make do. Sure. Hero Blade Hold. Except I can ghor-clan Rampager over it now. We'll see if he remembers that I have ghor-clan Rampager up. If not, we can still put out a Tarmogoyf, which will kill it. Let's see if he remembers. I think he's gonna remember, but he might not. He doesn't remember. Crazy. ghor-clan Rampager comes out of nowhere and beats down. And we are going to hit for 4 and kill his Hero Blade Hold. So I guess we're playing against a tokens deck, like a tokens that's heavy on the hate. Yeah, it has to be a tokens deck. So I don't know why he hasn't really played any tokens. Maybe just because he doesn't have like a ton of colored mana. But if he plays a sorcery, our Tarmogoyfs get even bigger. They become 5/6s, which is so rare in this deck. Hero Blade Hold. Okay. I'm still gonna attack. I got a ghor-clan Rampager again. Sweet. I'm still gonna attack. If he blocks, I could have at worst still Lightning Heal. I guess I couldn't have Lightning Helixed. I can still ghor-clan Rampager. So he was like, no, not this time. That's fine. We're gonna put out that hero, or we're gonna put out the Tarmogoyf. He can spend like all of his mana to gain lifelink and death touch, which is fine. We're gonna lose some life here, but not nearly as much. Let's go into declare blockers, please. Okay. I will gladly let you do Death Touch if you want, since I have a backup Tarmogoyf, and you do not know that. Zealous Persecution. Alright, well that sucks. But is alright, I suppose. I'm going to lose quite a bit of life there. And if I ever draw a white mana, this game can come back in our favor. Spectral Possession. Alright, we do have a white mana again, finally. We're going to pay the 2 life. If he does not block, we will win. If he blocks, we do 1, 2, we do 2 plus that, so we don't win, but we come close to winning. But we're probably just going to end up having to exile the blade, the hero blade hold, and then putting out a Tarmogoyf. But we'll see what kind of blocks he decides to do. That's okay with me. Again, that's totally fine with me. At worst, we could do, if he didn't block this way, we could have done more. But, so if we Rampager, it doesn't do nearly enough. We're just going to be okay with that. And let's see, to set a little stopping point on his turn, we click right here. So we're just going to make sure that we do something on his upkeep. And we are going to pay for a Tarmogoyf. And we'll take off that stopping point now, because we don't need it. Leaving him with 3 little tokens. I think we just let it go through in the hopes that he does not have a way to give them 1+1. I guess we could block, and then he could activate the Vault of the Archangel. If he does that and he attacks all out, well, we'll see if he attacks all out. And he's not attacking all out, like I thought. Cool. He could have had lethal if he just attacked all out, and I probably wouldn't have blocked with my Tarmogoyf. Let's see here, he's going to Path to Exile my Tarmogoyf. Seemingly okay. Yes, we will use this ability. We will grab ourselves a red source. And we're going to do main phase. We grabbed another Tarmogoyf, which is funny. I guess we're just going to attack him. And we will leave it open that if he decides to block and activate the Vault of the Archangel, we are still at an advantage. How do we do that? Well, it could involve ghor-clan Rampaging. It could involve Lightning Helixing. It could involve Tarmogoyfing. And let's see here. If we Rampager, he's not dead. So that's fine. He's probably going to activate that, gain 2 life, and that will be that. But then we're just going to put out the Tarmogoyf and the Loom Lion. Why? Because then we can Rampager and Lightning Helix, so it's not that big of a deal that he's gaining 2 life. And then we are going to go ahead and cast this. And yes, that is in fact the 3rd Tarmogoyf, because we're awesome like that. And we're also going to put out the Loom Lion, so we're still going to keep out a lot of damage. He can put out a lot of blockers, but it won't really matter. So he drew a land, which is a pretty crappy thing to draw. Lightning Bolt, so we can cast almost all of this. We're just gonna attack out here. We'll see if he's got a Path to Exile. We'll see where he blocks. Let's see here. 2 damage plus 3 damage is not going to be enough, so we're going to have to ghor-clan Rampager. Let's ghor-clan Rampager on the Tarmogoyf. And we'll see if he's got a Path to Exile. If he's got a Path to Exile, that's, I mean, there's nothing I can really do about it. I'm going for the kill right now. But that is a ton of damage. That's... Yeah, Path to Exile. Oh, no. Zealous Persecution, huh? And he's going to be what? Is he doing? Zealous Persecution to do something. Yeah, let's say it just sucks out like 2 more damage. Okay, so then we go down to, we do 4 plus 4 is 8, and then 1, so he survives by 1 damage, and we're just Lightning Helix. I think we Lightning Helix here. Sure. I still think we end up winning, but it doesn't really matter too much. Yeah, I mean, he's down to 2, but he cannot attack next turn, so we can just simply bolt him. We don't even need to worry about attacking through something. I think we're going to see a concession here. I mean, he can put out something to block, but that doesn't really matter. And that was Zoo in a nutshell. Definitely a bad start because we didn't get ourselves the mana that we need to, but you can see that we weren't really easily hit out. Zealous Persecution could sometimes destroy a lot of aggro decks, but that doesn't really destroy us, especially when we've got Tarmogoyfs coming out the butt. But like ghor-clan Rampager, you saw how much work he did, Lightning Helix, eventually when we got our mana that we needed to get. Again, not a perfect game that I wanted to show, but you can always check my other videos or the thread for more games showing sort of how we can wreck face. Notice that I still was able to attack through a ton of blockers, a ton of lifelink, and even removal, quote-unquote, with Path to Exile and the Zealous Persecutions. So it's not the worst thing in the world, you know, like Zoo is not easily hitted out like a lot of other aggro decks, and that's exactly why I play it.